Have you ever tried to get a handle on how all the world's religions connect? I mean, it can feel like this impossibly tangled web of names and dates and beliefs. Well, in this explainer, we're going to untangle that. We're going to look at all the world's faiths as one giant interconnected family tree. Okay, let's jump right in.
So first things first, let's just get a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about here. The four biggest religions on the planet are usually considered to be Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And as you can see, the top three are absolutely massive. I mean, data from the Pew Research Center shows that Christianity and Islam alone have over 4 billion followers. Then you add in Hinduism with another billion plus. These are the giants that really shape our world.
So here's our game plan. We'll start by mapping out the whole idea. Then we'll dig into the ancient roots. From there, we'll explore the three huge branches of the tree: the Dharmic, the Abrahamic, and the Chinese traditions. And we'll wrap up by looking at what this living, breathing tree can tell us about faith today.
All right, let's get into our first section, mapping the world's faiths. And here's the most important idea to get your head around. Religions don't just pop up out of nowhere. They grow, they split off from each other, and they're constantly influencing one another all throughout history. To make sense of all these complicated relationships, we're going to use one single really powerful metaphor for this whole explainer: the family tree. This is going to help us see really clearly how different faiths share common ancestors and how new branches are always sprouting from older ones. Okay, now for our second section. Let's actually dig down into the roots of this tree. Because to really get it, you've got to go way back to the dawn of civilization and find the common ancestors of today's biggest religions.
And this timeline just lays it out so well. Look at how Egyptian and Mesopotamian beliefs helped shape what would become early Israelite religion, the precursor to Judaism. But then, at the same time, all the way over in ancient India, you have the beliefs of the Indus Valley civilization mixing with these migrating Proto-Indo-European peoples, and that blend is what created Vedic religion, which is the root of Hinduism.
Now here's where it gets really interesting, this hidden connection. Those Proto-Indo-Europeans, they didn't just influence religion in India. Other groups of them also moved into places like Persia and Greece, and their philosophical ideas, things like dualism, good versus evil, and the idea of an afterlife, those ideas would later influence Jewish thought during periods of cultural mixing. So what does that mean? It means the world's two oldest continuous religions are, believe it or not, distant cousins. How wild is that?
So let's climb up our first huge branch in Section 3, the Dharmic traditions. This branch grew right out of the Indian subcontinent, and it includes some of the most philosophically deep and fascinating faiths in the world. Now, to get this branch, you have to get this one word, dharma. It's not just another word for religion. Nope. It's the idea of a cosmic order, the fundamental laws that actually structure reality itself. And that concept, it's at the very heart of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism.
So, let's talk about Hinduism. What is it really? I think for a lot of non-Hindus, the one thing they know is that it has a lot of gods. But does that really make it polytheistic? Well, the answer is way more complex and way more interesting than that.
The truth is, Hinduism is incredibly diverse. You have some Hindus who are basically monotheistic. They see all the different gods as just aspects of one single ultimate reality. Then you have others who are henotheistic. They worship one supreme god, but they acknowledge that other lesser gods exist. And you even have pantheists who believe God and the universe are the exact same thing. There's even room for atheistic philosophy within the Hindu tradition.
And these different beliefs often focus in on devotion to a specific deity. By far the largest group is Vaishnavism, which centers on Vishnu, the preserver. Next up is Shaivism, which honors Shiva, the god of transformation. And then other traditions like Shaktism and Smartism make up the rest of this incredibly rich tapestry.
But Hinduism didn't just stay the only game in town. Around 500 BCE, this new spiritual movement bubbled up called the Shramana. These were seekers who totally rejected the authority of the traditional Vedic priests and all their complex rituals. And it was out of this, pretty revolutionary movement that two other huge religions were born: Buddhism and Jainism. And of course, Buddhism would spread far beyond India to become a major world faith.
Okay, let's jump from the East all the way over to the Middle East to another gigantic branch on our tree, the Abrahamic family. Now, all three of these faiths, we're talking Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they all trace their spiritual family tree back to the prophet Abraham. But even though they share that common root, man, did their branches grow in different directions.
And to understand this family, we have to clear up a really common misunderstanding. This quote just nails it.
A lot of Christians and people who grew up Christian, they read the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, through a totally Christian lens. And they just kind of assume Judaism is just Christianity, but without Jesus. That is just not how it works at all.
Okay, this right here is the fundamental difference. At its very core, Christianity is all about belief. Specifically, belief in Jesus as the Messiah to achieve salvation. Judaism, on the other hand, puts a much bigger emphasis on doing. The focus is on the practices, the traditions, the actions you take to live a good life according to God's laws. And then there's Islam, the third great branch, which uniquely emphasizes submission, a complete way of life guided by divine law that really integrates both belief and action.
That Jewish focus on doing is all wrapped up in a concept called halacha. It's the whole body of Jewish religious law. And you have to understand this because the main difference between modern Jewish denominations, from Orthodox to Conservative to Reform, is all about how they interpret this law and whether they think it's eternally binding or if it's something that can change over time. And of course, all three of these faiths have changed dramatically over time. Judaism began as this temple-based religion of the ancient Israelites, and it evolved into the Rabbinic Judaism we see today. Christianity started as just one sect within Second Temple Judaism before it split off around the figure of Jesus. Then, centuries later, Islam emerged, with the Prophet Muhammad presenting what was seen as a final, direct revelation from God, one that completed and corrected the scriptures that came before. Each one is a huge evolutionary leap from that common Abrahamic truth.
Now for our third and final major branch, and this one has a totally different vibe. China's three teachings. This is a branch where the lines between religions get really blurry, and it's all defined by this philosophy of mixing and matching.
The key word you need to know to understand this branch is syncretism. It's just the blending of different beliefs and practices. In China, it's not weird at all for one person to draw from Taoist, Confucian, and Buddhist traditions all at the same time to create their own unique spiritual worldview.
And you can really see here how these three teachings kind of complete each other. Taoism gives you this mystical, internal path to finding harmony with the universe, with the Tao. Confucianism gives you a really practical, external set of rules for creating harmony in society. And then Buddhism, which came over from India, adds this deep spiritual layer focused on escaping suffering and reaching enlightenment. So we've reached our final section. Now that we've explored the roots and the major branches, what's the big lesson here? What can we take away from looking at world religions as this constantly evolving tree?
This is the most important takeaway of all. This family tree is not some dusty artifact in a museum. It's a living, breathing system. Religions are always changing, they're always influencing each other, and they're always sprouting new movements. Just think about the Shramana Revolution that gave us Buddhism, or the Protestant Reformation that split Christianity into a million pieces, or the rise of Sufism that added this amazing mystical side to Islam. The tree is always growing. And that brings us to one last, really provocative thought to leave you with. If this tree is always growing, and new faiths are always emerging from the old ones, what does the future hold? What ideas or movements out there today might become the next major branch on the world's religious family tree?